and welcome to the Queerness Diaries. So today I'm very happy to be joined by Jacob Marquez, all the way from Seattle in the US. So thank you so much today for joining me. I'm super happy to have you on the podcast and to delve into your Queerness Diary. So how's it going over there in Seattle?
It's going fantastic. It's sunny, despite what people may think from watching a lot of Grey's Anatomy. It doesn't rain here that often. It's actually quite sunny often. Um, so yeah, but the weather does not determine my mood like some people. So yeah, it's going fantastic. I'm just enjoying my free time and talking to people like yourself. So what could go wrong with that?
Awesome. Well, I'm super happy to have you on today, to kind of delve into your story, hear about your journey with music, and you can see in the background you've got your very cool pink guitar over there. And
Right.
I thought it'd be so fantastic to delve into all the chapters of your diary and the journey you've been on. And so before we do that, I thought if you could kind of give an introduction to yourself first. So talk a little bit about what you're doing with your music, and then we'll delve into your queerness diary.
Yeah. So my government name is Jacob Marquez. My artist name is j.�henry. There's a funny, not a funny, but there's a cute story of how that name came about, which we could get into. The pink guitar that you noted, actually, I don't even play guitar. It's just there because I like the look of it.
Yeah, it looks cool.
It looks cool. Everyone comments on it. Nobody comments on the keyboard that I have behind me, but my head generally covers it, I guess. Um, I'm more of a bass player. And even with that, I'm not proficient in it by any means. I'm more of a writer and more of a storyteller at the end of the day. I think that's
Yeah,
where I really find excitement in craft and creativity.
yeah,
But I play instruments because um, I use music as the medium by which I tell my stories. And so,
yeah.
um, yeah, that's why I have those things. Eventually, I'll learn guitar more than I do today, which is not very much.
It is a
Um,
challenge, isn't it, guitar? I remember I've still got mine in one of the cupboards, and every time I would try and tune it, a string would pop or something. And in the end, I just
yeah,
left it there. So I'm like, maybe one day.
yeah. Or just buy better strings.
Yeah, that's true.
Either one.
But it's so true with music as well, like to have that space and ability to get messages you want to put out there with music and put it into songwriting and to be able to channel that through the thought process and put it out through music. I always say, even though the feelings we have about a situation or somebody, whatever that situation is, can change over time. There's something about music when we listen to it pulls us back to how we felt in that moment. And I
Yeah.
imagine by writing songs, it's almost therapeutic in the way, but when you go on a journey with music and songwriting, it's so great to look back at that sort of collection that you've built and not just brought it to life, but you've got a way that you can, you've always got it as a sort of memory book through music that you can look back to that time as well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. I think there's all these studies, right, about how music helps patients or people with dementia, right, in
Yeah.
helping them remember certain things about themselves, their lives, their loved ones, that is difficult for them to remember otherwise, right? So,
Yeah.
and like what you're saying, there is this very strong connection between music and other sort of senses, auditory, olfactory, probably sensory in terms of touch or the tactile.
Yeah.
That's, yeah, when it's tied to a strong emotion, it's easy to bring up once you have that stimulus again. So it's very fascinating, the human mind. That's probably why I majored in psychology when I went to college.
Yeah. And I think it's one of the things with music I always find like I will go back and play a song from like 2017 and I'm instantly transported to that time, the people, the memories, and I'm like suddenly immersed in that moment again.
Yeah. Is there a song recently that you've gone back to and it brings up memories
Um,
like that?
I used to listen to, they're not that well known even over here in Europe, but a band called Nightly I used to listen to quite a lot. So I've been listening to a lot of their early stuff lately.
Yeah.
But Generally, I'm one of these sort of music nerds that has a yearly playlist on Spotify and puts all my songs into that anyway.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So
You can monetize that.
I know, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, I thought it'd be fantastic to delve into your diary and go all the way back right to chapter one at the beginning. So, how does your story begin?
Yeah. I should have pulled out my diaries for this conversation and then ran it through ChatGPT or something to
Yeah.
summarize. How does my story begin? It begins like every other story, right? I'm just a young boy. What's that song? When I was a young boy,
Oh
my
yeah.
father, he took
Yes.
me to the city.
I used to
Um,
love that song. I
it's
forgot who
it's so
sings it
good.
though. Yeah.
The
We Are
drummer,
Young, wasn't it? That was the one.
the drummer, I think of My Chemical Romance just died, or one of the band members. Um, Unfortunately, rest in peace. Yeah, so I was just a young kid. I had parents. I lived in the south part of Washington, so that's the state that I'm from. If you're familiar with the states of the United States,
Yeah.
if you're not, it's in the northwest corner of the United States.
Mm.
Um, and I had, a typical childhood, and then I didn't.
Yeah.
It was a very tumultuous childhood. I grew up in poverty, um, and oh wow, that's interesting. Sorry, I'm a huge fan of tangents,
Yeah, don't worry. I'm the
and my
same.
husband just walked in, so if it gets a little loud, we can cut that out. Um, yeah, so grew up in poverty. Both of my parents were drug addicts. My my mom is recovering, and she's been clean or not using for
Mm.
13 years, 14 years, quite a long time. Super proud
Yeah.
of her. She's like my inspiration for a lot of things in life.
Yeah.
My father passed recently. He struggled with addiction most of his life, and so that's a that's an interesting thing that I think plays into a lot of my perspectives in life. The topics that I love to explore.
Mm.
Um, ways that I see the world. Right? I think you see
Yeah.
the world differently when you grow up in different circumstances, which is like an obvious thing to say, but
Yeah.
we forget that sometimes, and I'm someone who I don't regret or want to rewind and go back and say, like, I wish that didn't happen. I'm a
Yeah.
firm believer that everything happens for a reason, even the things that are hard, because it's all meant to teach you something important. And
Mm.
you're not meant to be disempowered through life, right?
Yeah.
So, really trying to find empowerment in the shitty things. Can I
Yeah.
cuss?
So
I don't
true.
know.
Yeah. Yeah, I know what you mean. I
Yeah.
think that's so I always say that all the things that happen along the way, we go through some pretty wild chapters sometimes, and we never know how short or long those chapters are going to be. Or the only constant is the pen is always moving. We never know when our story's, going to end. And I was speaking with a friend the other day actually about how all the events we kind of have in life, including the shitty ones, sort of act as a fertilizer in a way for how we're meant to be, in
Yeah.
the present. It's like we go through some wild stuff, but I think it's very important to look back on it and find a place where you're like, now all these things were meant to happen in my story. It's
Yeah.
shaped me to be who I'm meant to be in this moment. And it's good to, be able to reach a point where you say, no, I wouldn't change anything because, that's the one constant. You can go back and reminisce, but you can never, once it's done kind of thing.
Yeah. 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 I mean, as you were talking, I was just trying to make an analogy. In a good movie, there's always going to be some trauma or drama, right? There's always going to be some sort of conflict, right? That's storytelling 101. And you
Mhm.
never sit there and think, oh, I wish I could go back and make that not happen in the movie, right?
Yeah.
Or some people might, but typically you're going to say, wow, that was an incredible movie, right? And
Yeah,
it's
so
incredible
true.
because they went through something and then overcame it, right? So,
Yeah.
you know. we're just living our movie.
Yeah, it's so true. And how was it as you sort of started to navigate growing up, sort of finding yourself through school and college and, finding your way? I always think, I still say I'm on a story, still finding my way now, but how was it, sort of through those adolescent years as you started to find yourself navigating school and college, going through that period?
Yeah. It was interesting for sure. I mean, I always knew education was like my way out,
Yeah,
right? Way out of the situation that I was in. And I think when I was younger, it definitely was out of spite. And it was out of like, I'm better than X, Y, and Z, my parents, other family members, this person, that person. It was seen as like, this is my way out to prove that I am more capable than the people around me because look
yeah,
where they ended up.
yeah,
And I think as I've gotten older, I've found a way to hold space for both accountability and empathy, which I think
yeah,
is super important, right? Like recognizing that my parents had their own sort of trauma that they were trying to work through, and that manifested in particular ways that I didn't like or appreciate, but I can hold empathy for that situation that they were in.
yeah,
Um, but also hold them accountable still and have conversations about, yeah, that didn't really work out for me,
yeah,
or um, just recognizing the challenges that came with it. But to go back to your question, yeah, education and continuing to pursue knowledge and build this wealth of knowledge was always the way that I saw myself building wealth in other ways, financially, from a relationship perspective, um, and so yeah, education was the way. So then I left, went to college. I wasn't pursuing music. I was always interested in music throughout this whole entire time, right? Since I was
yeah,
like 14, 15, I thought about making albums and
yeah,
thinking about what would it be called? What would it be about? What's the track list? Even though I never
yeah,
wrote the songs out, like I always had a
yeah,
track list. So I was always interested in this concept of telling a story,
yeah,
sometimes my story, but telling a story through music and words. Um, but it was a different time, and I grew up in a small town, and again, I was going through all this like turbulence as I was growing up, and so I think I had trouble finding my way in all of
yeah,
that, right? From a music perspective, and finding people that I like had synergy with that like
yeah, for
kept me
sure.
motivated to keep doing it, right? Because it was a small town and there wasn't a lot of people doing it. Um,
Yeah,
and you didn't have YouTube and all these things, right? So I couldn't go on and learn like how do I create a reverb or how do I,
yeah,
mix something or do drums, and now you can go online and learn anything, right? But back
yeah,
then
it's so true.
it was like, how do I even record something? You,
Yeah, no,
you
I
kind of needed
remember
a
that.
disc.
Like, I remember being on Fruity Loops like 15 years
Yeah.
ago. Like, what does this button do? How can I make this sound good? Or just thinking, well, I'm just going to keep experimenting until I've got something together. But I think it's really good when you've got a constant. And for example, if that's music, then that's always going to be there to go to in whatever time you're in. And when it acts as like a creative board to express your whatever you're going through at the time, there can be so much power in the music and it can give you so much motivation, and yeah, it's wild how much things have changed even in the last 5 years, but let alone the last 15, who
Yeah,
remembers a time before YouTube these days?
I know. I always think about what was the first viral video that I watched.
Yeah, I
I
know
don't,
it's
I
like,
can't, I think it could have been, what was it called? Something with chairs. It was like a frog
oh
and
yeah, I
some
think I've
chairs.
seen it. It sounds, does
Now
it's
it might
ringing a
play
bell
on my phone.
anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, that's probably one of the first like viral videos that I watched. which is wild. Yeah. I mean, and now it wouldn't even be considered viral.
I know it's like such a different way of life to look back, life before smartphones, those first videos on YouTube. I'm like, so much has changed. But I think as well, when you get into music production and have that sort of outlet and interest, it's amazing how much you can learn when you use it as a way to you know, when you can be self-taught and really get into all the different aspects of the software, it's crazy what you can do, isn't it? It's like, oh, I'm
Sure.
bringing this track to life, and I don't really know what I'm doing, but it sounds good.
Yeah. 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 That's what it's all about. Whatever sounds good, whatever feels good, whatever sounds good, you know. Um, it's not about music theory. To some people it is, but to most people it's not, you know. And
Yeah,
in the same way with lyrics too, and I struggle with that sometimes. It's not about how technically complex this line
yeah,
is, right? Most people don't care about that.
yeah, yeah,
And I struggle with that sometimes because I do care about it. But it's just the sweet spot is can you be technically crafted and also uh, have the feeling
yeah,
in the song? That's like the sweet spot. And I think, Prince is a great example of that.
yeah, for
He
sure.
just he just knew exactly like I don't know. He was just incredible.
Yeah, right. I know. It's like when I look back how music has had such an impact on my life and where I've been, there's always a song that defines every era, every sort of
Mm,
chapter I've been through that I can always go, back to. And I think as well, like for you, I imagine the power of songwriting has sort of been a way to journal a lot through your life as well. Because I think when you've got a way to put into words, whatever you're going through at a time, there's such a power in just being able to, even if no one ever sees it, just write it down, put it in the cupboard, whatever, and no one ever looks at it. There's a feeling, isn't there, of being able to just get that off your chest, whatever you're going through at the time, and just put those thoughts into words, however they end up on the page.
yeah. I actually struggled with that for a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah. I envy sometimes people that say, music and writing is like my outlet to process things. Um, I would say I'm just now starting to figure out what that is for me.
Yeah.
Because most of the easiest songs I find to write are songs about love and like
Yeah.
romance and very cliche, over the top Frank Sinatra-esque songs about love, right?
Yeah.
But they're hip hop. Um, Alicia Keys said that once, like she feels the most inspired when she's in love, and it's so
Yeah.
easy, it just like flows out, right? I'd say typically people think of artists as they write when they're sad or when they're angry or
Mm.
when something happens to them, right?
Yeah.
Amy Winehouse, she didn't say this, but like I'm insinuating it from some of the stuff that I've seen about her,
Mm.
where, you know, um, there was a point in the movie Amy Winehouse, or it's called Back to Black, the new
Yeah.
one,
Yeah.
the newest one. Really good movie. Where she's like, I need new songs. I'm going to go live life. Right. And part of that was going and finding some guy, hooking up with them, falling in love with them, blah, blah, blah. But
Yeah.
eventually breaking up with them. And like that was the catalyst to say, okay, now I'm going to go write an album.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and I'm just, if I get to that point, I don't want to write at all. I find it so hard. Which is why the song Everything on the album, which is like right in the middle. It's right when the album starts turning into more self-reflection.
Yeah.
Um, it was very hard for me to write because it's an angry song. It's all about like F you and I don't want to
Mm.
be in this relationship anymore and you lied to me and all these things,
Yeah.
which are still authentically me, but they're just yeah, they come from a more dramatic place. And so yeah, it's a little bit harder for me to write. So this concept of like me having songwriting as an outlet for journaling
Yeah.
partly isn't true for me. Like a lot of my journaling was really journaling, right? And just free writing and thinking through emotions. And some would argue that helps you with being creative. Like if you're a fan
Yeah.
of morning pages and stuff like that. Um, and also therapy sessions.
Yeah. Yeah.
Shout out to therapy sessions.
I know, right? It's funny though when you look back and see, the journey that you go on with creativity and how to approach it and the different ways, that we learn to express ourselves. And I think it happens a lot with artists. You can get that writer's block sometimes, but you just get those random moments of creativity where you're like, all right, I need to write it now, and
Yeah.
that can happen at the most unexpected times. We make plans and then life just hits us unexpectedly. And how was it sort of for you as you navigated that period through sort of college and through sort of that time in terms of finding yourself and also through your love of music? How did that kind of start for you, especially in the hip hop space? How did you start to, think, yeah, I really want to do this. It's something I really want to get into in the future.
Yeah. I think it built over time. But again, I became enthralled with hip hop partly through my dad, to be honest. He played a lot of Dr. Dre, The
Yeah,
Crown 2001. He loved that album, and he really taught me the beauty in the craftsmanship of music, right? He was a fan of all these great artists from Prince to Elton John, who's like a pianist aficionado, right? Who can write an incredible melody in chord progression, like no one's
yeah,
business, right? Um, to Dr. Dre and like his sonics and just how incredible they sounded in the way a snare snaps and a
yeah,
kick drum really thumps. And the difference between that and just like an average song, right? So that's where my fascination with music really started, is through my dad and just his fascination with music. Um, and then and then I heard Waterfalls by Left Eye or
yeah,
by TLC. And Left Eye's rap was the first rap I ever learned.
yeah, yeah.
And I don't know, I think it was a mixture of I love TLC. It was also one of the first albums I ever had. And I think it's because I stole it from my sister. Um, but I was young, so to me it wasn't stealing. I just want to listen to it.
Yeah, yeah.
And it was kind of risky, right? As like a young kid, they're talking about sex and hooking up and like creeping on your partner, and like
Yeah.
there's that one song where she's on the toilet, and anyway, if you haven't heard the album, you can go listen to it. I'm not going to reenact it here, but um I was just so like intrigued by it. And then this rap came out, and I think it was the first time I heard like great lyricism.
Yeah.
Like Left Eye is underrated in my opinion. And I think she would have had like a great career if she would have lived longer. Um, but it was like great lyricism plus great delivery
Yeah.
and authenticity,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um, and that really just opened up my world to more like that.
Mm.
Yeah, I don't know. I would love to study a little bit more, but so it was like that, and then Chronic 2001, and then it was like Eminem, and that's when I
Yeah.
really started getting into like the craftsmanship of putting together bars and rhyme schemes. And even
Yeah.
though most of his stuff was violent, as a young person, I enjoyed it, right?
Yeah.
Which is ironic because I'm gay, and so it was like
Yeah.
it's very like homophobic.
Mm.
Um, which is like a whole nother conversation in itself we don't need to get into. But yeah, I mean, to this day, he's one of my favorite writers because of his technical capability. Um, and then as I got older, I started diving more into other sorts of hip hop, the Kanye West, the Commons, the Lupe Fiasco Food and Liquor album is one of my favorite albums. Because again, he's different. His writing capability is incredible. His delivery is incredible. He's authentic, and he's writing about stuff that I can relate to a certain
Yeah.
extent. That's not about, you know, killing people and all
Yeah.
the other things that um yeah, they can't I don't know, it just kind of went from there. So I don't know if I actually answered your question, but this that's how it started. That's how it started, and then it kind of just went from there. Yeah, I went down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, I think when you've got a passion for something though, it's amazing to see, how it can evolve over time. And I imagine, especially in the hip hop space, there must be an element whilst you're finding aspects, of your sexuality, like going into that space, like must be kind of almost an element of it's almost uncharted territory, a bit nerve-wracking at times to be gay going into hip hop and the sort of thought process that can come along with that. You grow up on these musicians and it's so against everything who you are, maybe in the lyrics in
Yeah.
a lot of ways, but you love it at the same time and you've got so much passion to bring it to life. How has it sort of been to sort of navigate that with your sort of queer side and infuse, hip hop together? Because I imagine there must have been some aspects, of nervousness and anxiety as well, sort of stepping into that genre specifically.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why I mean, to a certain extent, that's why I didn't pursue it as heavily as I wanted to. I think
Yeah.
there's, and I've talked about this before, but there is just a strong sense of other
Yeah.
and in a variety of ways, but a big way being I'm gay and I want to step into this space that is historically very homophobic, right?
Yeah.
That's not, I think in the, if we zoom out, that's not like a hip hop specific thing. It's not like hip hop's homophobic.
Yeah.
It's just that the society in which hip hop was cultivated um, was homophobic and still is in a lot of ways. And so hip hop just took on that characteristic as well. Um, and so, yeah, I struggled with that a lot. I always felt like I didn't have a space there.
Yeah.
Which is also why I think I've gravitated towards artists such as Lupe Fiasco and what have you, because they didn't have as much of that like misogyny and
Yeah.
homophobia in their music, and they were talking about other things and societal problems um and stuff like that. But yeah, so when I was in college, I was really starting to explore what my sexuality was and what like my romantic uh affinities were.
Yeah.
I felt less and less um, willing to like step into that space, even though I still loved writing and I still loved writing these songs. Um, and then eventually, you get older and you stop caring what people think, right? Or at least you're more comfortable with yourself. Even though you still have to come out very often, right? You still have to make a decision. Do I come out today? Do I come out to
Yeah.
this person? I have no idea who they are. They may care that I'm gay. I may get a negative reaction. Now, fortunately, I live in Seattle, which admittedly has a bubble, right? It's very liberal.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm very privileged and grateful that I live here because there's other places where, yeah, you likely wouldn't come out as often as you would here because they're just a little bit more um, closed-minded. But yeah, in the hip hop sense, it was definitely a hindrance of me feeling like I wanted to pursue it more and share my music more. And even as I picked it back up the past couple of years, the first
Yeah.
year I thought about it a lot in terms of how much do I actually share my queerness um, as I'm developing this artistry and this brand. But as again, as I started formulating who I was and also recognizing that it started to feel like I was like closeted again, and I hated that
Yeah.
feeling.
Yeah.
I mean, the reason I came out to start with is to respect the people that fought for my ability to do that, right? All
Yeah.
the people that couldn't do it for so long and fought for my rights as a queer person. If I didn't come out, I would be disrespecting all of that hard work.
Yeah. Yeah.
So as an artist, I just went through the exact same thought process. And I'm like, there's no way I'm gonna stay closeted. And if people don't want to listen to my music because I'm gay, they're probably not people I want to listen to my music anyway. They're not my
Yeah.
target audience.
Yeah, exactly. And
So
yeah, I think it's so important on our journeys that we go on to, because I always say I've been through it too. So through my teenage years, you build up a wall and then another wall and then another wall. It's like this chameleon effect almost. The parts of you are there at your core, but a lot of us tend to build up these safety blankets and mask a lot of things in our life and almost play these different roles and characters in a way to protect ourselves in some instances, from the queer parts of ourselves. And a
right.
lot of our adult life is then unpacking those parts, however and it could be a long journey sometimes, unpacking those parts to get back to those parts of us that have always been there at our core, kind of, but they're buried amongst, so much protective layers. It's almost like peeling back an onion to get back to, who we are right down
Yeah.
at that core. But it's very freeing once we do so. And it's like, well, we can't ever imagine going back to that time because there's a lot of struggles that come along with it in building up these different protective layers. And it's
Yeah.
so freeing just to kick down the walls. But there's definitely a period of being like, okay, the walls are down, but who am I?
Yeah. 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 Yeah, I have that conversation a lot about once you make the decision to come out as a queer man or whoever you're coming out as. For me, it was as a queer man, as a gay man. It's it opens the door to so many other things to explore
Yeah,
about yourself, right? In various aspects of your life, because that's actually um whenever I have to give a speech or I feel nervous about doing something, whether it's at work,
yeah,
a show, right? My like mantra is like I came out. So
yeah,
this is nothing.
yeah.
All everything else is easy. I
Yeah,
already came out and put my loved ones on the line in terms of risking that relationship because I didn't know how they were going to react to me.
yeah,
And so if I've already done that, like there's nothing that I can't do, right? And there's no one that I can't be. Um, and so yeah, there is this freedom that you sort of reach when you say, here's my authentic self. Now
yeah,
here's a little bit more.
yeah. I know that's so true. And I think as well, for us kind of small town guys as well, when we go to the big city and suddenly we've got this freedom to be completely who we are. It's kind of like kid in a candy store almost at first.
Oh yeah.
I was 25 when I moved to Madrid, so it was quite late, but I remember feeling like, okay, now I can finally find who I really am. I don't have to hide even in work or any aspects of myself. And I don't know what these next few chapters, pages are going to entail, but I don't really care because I can just be for the first time completely myself. And,
Yeah.
it's like it's very free in that sort of moment, especially being from, a little sheep town. I imagine for you it was similar as well when you make that move, having that liberation, and it's like almost, shedding that skin, and it's like, okay, this is me now. I'm going to figure this this long ride out.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah. And I think it just helps you strengthen relationships that you have. And, you know, again, I was having this conversation with someone last night and we were talking about success and what does that mean and all those things. And, they talked about this period in their life where they had the house and the car and,
Mhm.
the family and the money and all those
Yeah,
things, but they were closeted,
yeah,
right? So they talked about white knuckling it and sort of being stressed about that and but now they've come out and they they don't have all those things that they once had and to me that's success to be able to wake up every day and say this is who I am and I'm fully able to live that life, that authentic life,
Yeah.
and to start building relationships, building new ones or continuing to cultivate ones that you already have
Yeah. So true.
based on that as a foundation, like that's golden right there.
Yeah,
That's
I know.
gold.
It's so true, and it's it's the sort of chapters unfold as our diary. It's like all these crazy stories we've had along the way. It's like one day we'll look back and we laugh or cringe or whatever at them, but they defined us and they're always going to be so important to
For
who we
sure.
are. And I wanted to talk as well about in terms of as you went into music and developing your stage name. So what made you choose as well the name j.𝐻ENRY, and how was the process of doing that? Because I always imagine for a lot of artists, like just choosing a name to be solid on sometimes is a process that maybe people can overthink, or maybe it's instant for a lot of people, but it can be a challenge, sometimes, right? So how did you sort of choose to settle on that name, and what was that process like for you?
Yeah, so the name J. Henry comes from when my husband and first started dating. I told
Yeah,
him this. It wasn't a secret, but it was just like a thing that I thought about, which was if I ever became a doctor for some
yeah,
reason, my name would be Dr. J. Henry.
yeah. I
I
like
just
that.
like the ring. I just like it. It just
Yeah,
sounds
yeah,
nice. And and since that day, and that was probably the first year that we started dating. Since that day, he's always called me J. Henry.
yeah.
Um, and and so that's at first I was going to call myself On the Mark because that's my Instagram handle. Um, but I just like the sophistication and the ring to it of J. Henry. And it's also this homage to why I started writing music again in the first place, which
Yeah,
was because of him. I really wanted to write this album for him, which eventually became an album for myself, which is kind of where Love J. Henry came into play. There's a lot of different layers to that album title as well.
yeah,
But the first half is all about love, and the second half is all about J. Henry, right? And really
yeah.
starting to reflect on who that person is and some of the trauma and um, various things. But yeah, that's where J. Henry came from. It came from me saying that if I was a doctor, I'd be called Dr. J. Henry.
I like that. I think it's got a really nice ring to it as well.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think as well having the album called Love j.𝐻ENRY is, as I listen to the album and as it goes along, the first listen when you kind of start off with, tracks like When, it can feel like that sort of early days feeling of being a little bit naive with a crush, and how, we've all been through that stage, those crushes we have that develop into romances and the expectations. And then gradually, as it goes along in the album, you see how our expectations of a romance as well can, as it goes along, sometimes it doesn't meet the reality, and we can end up in that space, of self-doubt. We go through these periods of, just feeling we've all been crushed by someone at some point in our lives. And
Yeah.
ultimately, it ends up being more of a chapter, of finding yourself and a feeling of enoughness, and finding, you know, how important it is to get that validation in ourselves. Because I always say, like, if one of my best friends asked me for advice, how would I apply that, to myself when I'm going through a time of crisis? Because we always give the best advice to our friends, and it's hard to find that place sometimes of being forgiven with ourselves and
Yeah.
finding that space within us to, you know, find a place of enoughness. And that message really comes across on the album, that it's really about a journey of self-discovery as much as it is kind of a journey about, the ups and downs of romance as well. And
Yeah.
how was it sort of putting together, when you imagine like the process, okay, I'm gonna go into the studio, I wanted to write. Were you even thinking of putting an album together at the start, or did you kind of just have some tracks in mind and it sort of rolled into being a full album?
Yeah, so I always I always had the goal of creating the album.
Yeah.
Um, and that the catalyst for that was my wedding with my husband, where I
Mm,
surprised him with this song that I wrote for him to Sam Smith's Love Goes, the live at
yeah.
Abbey Road version. And maybe one day I'll record that and put it out as like part of a mixtape or something,
Yeah.
so I don't get sued. But um, yeah, so that was the catalyst, and I just loved that experience so much that I wanted to like continue riding on that high and creating and sharing my love with this person that I just married. Uh,
Yeah.
and I felt like there was more to the story that I wanted to tell, right? And expand on those characters and that world that I created.
Yeah.
Because I also wrote a play for my wedding. So it was like a play plus a
Oh,
song. It was like
nice.
this whole production.
Yeah. Oh, awesome.
Yeah. And not all gay weddings are like that for people who may be listening. I had some, there's a couple of folks that are like, oh wow, gay weddings are quite crazy. It's like, well, not all of them are like that. I'm just a creative at heart. And so yeah, I got married in May, and I'd say by June I made the decision I want to make this album.
Yeah.
And then it kind of went from there. I the first song I wrote was When. The first song I produced was Creep, my rendition of it. Obviously, I didn't write it. Um, and then the last song I wrote and finished was May I Love, which is the last song of the album. And the hardest song was probably Everything. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I imagine as well, once you have got like, you're like, okay, I've done this, I've got the album. It's almost like, it's like a baby to put out into the world, it's like, okay, I'm so proud of this, but it's like, oh crap, this is real. Like, I'm doing this now. I'm going to put this out into the universe for everyone to here, it must be so rewarding, but very nerve-wracking at the same time. And how was it, once you'd recorded it to be like, yeah, I'm putting this out there, this is something that I want the world to listen to, and you were like, yeah, this is the final cut, I'm ready, it's going out there, there's no looking back.
Hmm. How was it? Like, what was
Yeah,
that
that sort
process
of
like
that
for
sort of process with sort of putting out the album, being like, okay, I am 100% finished. This is,
you?
I'm happy with everything I put on there because I don't know about you. I'm trying to think back. Like when I used to produce music, there'd be like 15 versions of a song, and then I'd still not be happy. I'd listen to one,
Yeah.
maybe one bar I wasn't happy with, one synth or something, and it ruined the whole track, and I'd overanalyze it. So how would you get
Yeah.
to that point where you're like, no, this is something I'm proud of, I'm happy with, I'm ready to put this out into the universe?
Yeah. Um, I 100% struggle with that. And I think a lot of artists do, right? Because
Yeah,
kind of what you're saying, or I'll insinuate and pull from what you're saying. I mean, it's such a vulnerable place to be in, to
yeah,
be an artist, especially nowadays. I would
yeah,
imagine, like back in the day, like Leonardo da Vinci, right? He would make a painting, and he was incredible, right? But he would make a painting and he'd put it up somewhere, and people would see it. And maybe some people didn't like him or didn't like it, right?
yeah,
And maybe they would whisper that to their friend as they were walking past his art. But nowadays, like you put your art out and it's on Instagram and TikTok and YouTube, and everyone can comment on it, and there's
yeah,
no real safeguards. I mean, there's some, but that gets into this weird thing about freedom of speech and all that
mm,
stuff, which is another conversation. But it's so easy for people just to crap on your art, right? And so it's
yeah,
such a vulnerable place to be in, to say, oh, I wrote this thing and I'm very proud of it. And then you put it out and you're just like hoping nobody says anything
yeah,
about it. You're like hoping people get it and
mm,
listen to it and share it and like feel the emotional connection and but you're at the same time there's also a hope of like I hope nobody craps on this.
yeah,
Um which was such a when I first started putting out music the first year was such a common thing of
Yeah.
just random people. I don't get it. Like random people just come in and they're like, they just tell you about how much you suck. I'm like,
Yeah.
cool. Do you have nothing better to do?
Yeah, I know. It's
Um, or give me a reason why. Like, tell me
yeah.
why. Give me a constructive criticism about why you think I'm not good, right? Don't
Yeah.
just come in here and, be a bully. Um,
Mm.
but then I started making funny videos out of all that stuff. So sometimes I hope people say negative comments. So I'm like, I need
Yeah,
more
like more
material.
inspiration. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I have videos I need to create.
Yeah.
Um, But yeah, so it's a very vulnerable place. Uh, I definitely felt some doubts. At the end of at the end of the day, I am 100% in love with the album. I
Yeah.
think I executed on the plan and the dream that I had in creating it.
Mm.
There's also some doubt of, are people going to get this album? Are they going
Yeah.
to listen to it and understand like the first song is all about naivety, but also hyper romance
Yeah.
and somebody that just like puts love on this pedestal and probably has watched way too many rom-coms. And then also understand that the rest of the album is his like exploration and experience and understanding that love is so much more, but
Mhm.
also because of that, it's so important and beautiful and part of life's and should be part of life's journey, right? It's one
Yeah.
of the greatest sort of experiences anyone could ever have, in my opinion. Um, and the fact that as you re-listen to the album, when actually takes on different meanings,
Yeah.
which is why it's probably my favorite song just because of that. Although, who knew moments? Yeah, I mean, they all have things about them. Like, yeah, that was dope. I did my thing on that song.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think there was a little bit of uncertainty, but there was more excitement in just putting it out there,
Yeah,
and
for
saying
sure.
I published an album.
Yeah, I always think as well when it comes to, any piece of art, we have our own experience of it, but we never know how it's going to resonate with someone else, the lyrics people can interpret in so many different ways. And I always say if it reaches someone and it makes them cry or you've done your job, or
Yeah,
brings some sort of big emotion, whatever that
yeah,
emotion is, then it's like, yeah, a sense of fulfillment, you've it's like, yeah, I've done this.
yeah, yeah. I'm like an onion. I just want to make people cry.
Yeah. Yeah, and I kind of wanted to, while we're on the subject of the album, kind of go through each of the sort of tracks as well to go through the inspiration and the lyricism and what sort of brought those tracks to life. Because I know on the intro you start off with a quote. Let me try and remember what it was. So it was, oh yeah, people say love comes when you least expect it. Isn't that serendipitous? So kind of talk me through, because I know there's a lot of albums now, they have these intros and outros. So why did you choose to have an intro rather than going directly into when for the opening of the album?
Yeah. So that's actually from my wedding.
Ah,
It's the play that I wrote for my wedding as like the ceremony.
yeah.
And that person speaking is our really good friend who is an actor, he's been on Broadway, and
Oh,
he
awesome.
was a big actor in Seattle when he lived here. He moved since our wedding. But um, considering like the catalyst for my album was my wedding and the creations that I made there, it kind of just felt appropriate to weave in artifacts from that
Yeah.
experience. And I'm a huge fan, again, I'm a huge fan of storytelling. And so it felt appropriate to have this narrative force sort of drive the story forward and have like these little moments where it's, the person is adding context and sort
Yeah.
of emotion in the album, right?
Yeah.
And the character that I wrote in the play is a representation of Cupid or God or the universe or whoever you see as driving the world, right? And
Yeah.
specifically who is driving love between people. And so that line sort of sets him or them, I guess, because who knows if Cupid is a man, woman, or otherwise.
Mm.
Um, it sets them up as like kind of cynical, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
right? And so that's kind of interesting because then you go directly into this song that's all about hyper love and romance and all that. So that's why I decided to open it up. And it also puts you into a scene, right? It puts you into this scene where there's like people congregating to talk about something that has something to do with love, right? Because you have like the audience in the background and then they get quiet and then he starts speaking, right?
Yeah.
Um, so that was the intention behind that, is to like set up this world that I'm now going to take you into.
Yeah, and I think it does it so well, and then you go straight into, I think this is where a lot of us have been there with, when we've had those sort of fairy tale ideas of romance. We've been, it's been a while for me when I'm trying to think back to those sort of romance days. But how was it sort of bringing that track to life? Because it does very much feel like that sort of feeling encapsulated of, you've got that slight naivety, but that excitement and almost innocence when you meet someone and that spark is there.
Yeah. Sorry, what was the actual question?
Oh, so just going into when now, so in terms
Okay.
of the sort of lyricism and bringing that to life.
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. My bad. Um, the first verse of When is probably one of my favorite verses I've ever written. I
Yeah,
love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. Because it's so like um aspirational,
yeah,
but also naive, right?
yeah,
But I think I'm a huge fan of having delusion, a little delusion in your goals, being a little delusional.
yeah,
And for someone to say, like, when I fall in love, people are going to paint pictures of us and put us in like the MoMA, right, as an art piece that they're going to come and visit and study and understand the intricacies of it
yeah.
and line up around the block to do that, sort of like the Mona Lisa.
Yeah, yeah,
And in that way, our love becomes an art piece, an art
yeah,
form that means not even death will do us part,
yeah, yeah,
right? Um, so when it's supposed to capture this aspirational relationship that I think I strive to have even today. And I think there's beauty in that, right?
yeah,
There's also toxicity, right? So you're kind of having this juxtaposition and these parallel sort of play together throughout the entire time. In the same way that the album is all about the hyper love and like the super depressed side of love.
yeah, yeah,
There's always these parallels happening. And so when is playing with those sort of not explicitly but implicitly.
yeah,
Um, but it's also just capturing the way that I perceive it, the way that I think about my husband and my relationship. And there's going to be turmoil, but we're going to put ourselves in our relationship back together with gold, like kintsugi, right? The Japanese art form.
yeah,
And again, it starts setting up this entire album to continue playing on the metaphor of art and art
yeah,
pieces and art forms and how our love is like art and is continually evolving. And kind of to the point that you said earlier, most artists know that their art is never finished.
yeah.
It's good enough to
So
put out,
true.
you know? And I think that's the other thing about love, not to get like super, you know, um, cliche, but art or love is all about finding someone that's good enough,
Yeah,
not about finding the perfect person, because that
yeah,
doesn't exist.
yeah,
It's all about who is good enough for me to say that's the person that I want to spend the rest of my life with.
Yeah, that's so important. I think when you find that person, you just know, don't you? When you meet that person and it's right, and it's like all the ones that have come before. Now it's like, no, I've met this person, and this person, just makes me feel whole, and there's just something there. And as the album goes on, go through other tracks as well, for example, through Who Knew, Lust for Love. So how was it sort of go through? So yeah, I thought it'd be good to kind of go through, like they do on the YouTube, like these track by tracks. So if we sort of go through the next track, and so how was it in terms of that? What can people hear with the lyrics on that? And so yeah, what's the message for Who Knew going into that one? And then we'll continue down through the rest of the album.
Yeah. Who knew probably is the song that I could put on and just instantly puts me in a good mood.
Yeah.
Especially by the end of it and you're doing um not key change. What's the word? It's like slipping my mind now, but when the key increases,
Yeah.
or you go up in key. In Maddie Goo, his artist name. Such an incredible singer, like crazy singer. And I mean, I'm
Yeah.
so privileged and grateful that I know him, that he's a friend, that he came over and like felt that song as well and just like delivered on the vocals
Yeah.
on that song. Crazy. And then Christian Pincock, who composed the song, is the only song on the album that I didn't compose or produce.
Yeah.
That's partly because I'm not a big band jazz composer, even
Mm.
though I was naive to think that I could compose a big band jazz song for 18 months and then realized that I couldn't. So I talked to him and he's a good friend. And I mean, he brought that song to life. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Anyway, who knew is just all about, yeah, the first moment you lay eyes on that person that you're like, who's that? I
Yeah.
want to get
Yeah.
to know that person. Right?
Yeah.
And that happened. That happened. I mean, the opening lines of it's like who knew that one glance would change my destiny? Wasn't looking for love, but love had a different quest for me because I saw your
Mm.
silhouette through a windowsill. You sat heavenly, beauty filled, majestically perfect. And that's it. That like describes the scene in which I first laid eyes on my husband,
Yeah.
where I was just walking to the office kitchen and I saw him through a conference room window. The
Yeah.
blinds were like partly open. I saw a silhouette and I was like, who's that?
Yeah. I love
And so that it's just meant to capture that feeling and that excitement and that giddiness and that like Frank Sinatra of romance. And yeah,
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. And that's sort of a perfect way as well. It leads into Lust for Love, I imagine, as well. And sort of right in that. And I imagine it was fantastic to also have these friends and bring them in as collaborators as well. When you've got someone you can bounce ideas off with, a song and they just get it and they vibe with it, then it makes the creative process, so much fun because it's like you've got these people that you already know in some way and they just get you, and then for them to get your music as well must be so fulfilling.
yeah, for sure. I mean, for the longest time, I thought I was going to do everything myself.
Yeah.
And some people can do that, but there's so kind of what you're saying, there's so much excitement and like more creative energy that can be had when you're collaborating with someone because you bring different perspectives, different ideas, and as long as there's an openness
Yeah.
to it, right? In my collaborations, I need them to feel like improv,
Yeah.
where there's an openness to ideas and there's always a yes and there's always a yeah, let's try that. And if it doesn't work, you just do something else, right?
Yeah, for
It's
sure.
not like we're in the 70s and we're recording on tape. It's all digital. So,
Yeah.
um, but yeah, once I started pulling more people into the album, it really started to gel together more as they were able to execute on ideas that either I had or they brought, and it just like made the songs go from, an 8 or a 9 to 11, 12, right? It really took them over the top. So yeah, collaboration super important.
Yeah, I know. It's so true when you've got, those people in your life that they just get it and you can bring them in, then it's where the magic happens, And how was it sort of bringing the next track, Lust for Love, into life as we go through the album?
Yeah. Um, so Lust Made Love is just all about the fact that when I first met my husband, I was 24, 23. I was young. I was young and naive. And yeah, I mean, I was very lusty. It
Yeah.
kind of started just because I wanted um let's say I only wanted one night and then I got more than that because I
Yeah.
started to fall in love with him. So Lust Made Love is all about the progression of this started out as just like a one night thing, but then we start to fall in love. And so our Lust Made Love. Um, and so yeah, it's just meant to be, there's lyrics in there that I think are clever and I find interesting. And I think if you dissect them, you can start to understand like more complexity in the story. But for the most part, it's just meant to be like, you know, capture that lusty, sexy feeling. That's why you have a saxophone solo,
Yeah.
like very
Gotta love a
stereotypical,
good sax solo. Yeah.
yeah, R&B stuff, which I
Yeah.
love. I thought it turned out great.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. And in terms of as the album goes on, you also have with moments, you also have the reprise as well. So what made you kind of do it in sort of having those two parts kind of together and blend into each other?
Yeah. So that was originally one song.
Yeah,
Um, and I I made the like very last minute decision to cut it up into two songs. And I think one side of that was it just felt long. It
yeah,
felt like for a song, there wasn't enough there to keep the interest for like
yeah,
one song. And also I felt like being a long song, it would be like a disservice to the first part where you have
yeah,
Charles Zade singing like beautiful chorus and um like this artistic idea being captured about like the little moments that you fall in love. And I think it's one of the songs that, I may do a music video for and release as a
yeah,
single. And so because of that, I was like, well, it like does it more of a service to be its own thing and really capture that essence. And then
yeah,
for the reprise to be there to continue the story in the way that I want it to, versus
yeah,
having it be the same thing.
yeah. And I
So
said,
that was the reasoning behind that.
yeah, and as you kind of as the album goes on, definitely as I'd noticed more of an electronic side comes in, with everything it kind of comes in with that big roar of synths.
Yeah.
And so what kind of made you as you went into that kind of sort of do that switch up? Because I love that intro where it's just like this big Chris I can never say the word crescendo of like roaring synths coming in, and then there's a bit more of an electronic sound, What was the sort of inspiration behind that track? 'Cause it definitely takes, a slightly more aggressive turn as we
Yeah.
get to there.
Yeah. So there was maybe like a handful of like key moments that I wanted to make sure I had in the album. The
Yeah,
first one was when, like really setting this sort of world up and this character. Second one was Who Knew? I really wanted a big band jazz song.
yeah,
The third one was Everything. And specifically, I really wanted this transition between this like person's madly in love
yeah,
and what the just happened.
yeah,
Because in my relationship, that's something that I struggled with a lot in terms of um, I would be madly in love with my husband, and then he would say something or do something, and it would just like trigger me, right?
yeah, yeah,
It flip the switch between I trust you and I'm in love with you and blah blah blah, and it would put me into like the abandonment protective mode that I
yeah,
that I grew to build up because of my past with my parents and those sorts of situations. Um, and so I'd move into this mode of like, I don't trust you, I don't love you, I don't need you in my life. Get out of, I don't need this relationship. Like I'm done.
Yeah.
And so the way for me to deliver that sonically, because I eventually had the lyrics for it, but sonically the way for me to deliver that was again to go from these beautiful jazz, luscious chords, piano chords to very harsh Yeezus, Kanye West, Yeezus, reminiscent synths, right?
Yeah.
That really just hit your eardrums and bring you to like this new world of anger, depression, sadness, guilt, questioning, reflection, all those sorts of things.
Yeah, and I think a lot of us can relate. We've been there in relationships where, things that we are working through or trying to resolve from, either past traumas or just things we have picked up from other relationships, things that we've maybe not dealt with can creep into our present relationships, and it can be very confronting, when it happens, and a whole new process to move through. And when you're with the right person, you find a way to weather the storm. But definitely when it sort of first comes up in relationships, it can be very confronting feeling, and you're like, shit, I don't know why, but I don't trust this person. Am I doubting myself? Like, why am I thinking this? It's like you go through all the range of emotions.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I think especially, I just made this connection right now. This is what I love about art and
Yeah.
about this album, but just about art in general, is there's always a new interpretation, right?
Yeah.
And I think when you're in a relationship and you have all these societal sort of notions about how a relationship should be and how you should feel and about the person and how it should like grow and all those things, you think, well, I should always just be in love with this person,
Mhm.
right? I can't ever have any conflict. I can't ever question my love for them. I can't ever do X, Y, and Z because that must mean I'm not in love. That must mean that this isn't the perfect relationship, you know? And so again, the first half of the album is talking about all those things, the romance, the love, the rom-com, blah, blah, blah. And then you move into, oh, well, it's actually not perfect.
Yeah.
But what
Yeah.
does that mean for the relationship, right? So yeah, that song kind of captures that as well. Especially um the first two verses are just angry. They're just all about like, I don't
Mm.
trust you, you're a liar, you ruined this relationship, not me. And then the
Yeah.
third verse is where it starts to be more self-reflective and like,
Mm.
okay, I'll admit I have a hand in this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I probably have more of a hand than I want to admit, right? And
Yeah.
it's because of X, Y, and Z, and it's something that I don't actually want to confront, but it's potentially causing a divide in our love and our relationship.
Yeah. For sure. And that then leads on to Creep. So what made you decide to choose this as a cover? Because I think it's, such a fantastic rendition, but what made you decide, I really want to have this on the album. It feels like this is the right space to have it come in the album now. And how is it sort of bringing your rendition to life for that?
Yeah. Um, Fun fact, my husband actively petitioned for me not to put this song on the album. He didn't like it for a lot of reasons. Um, he also said very lovingly,
Yeah.
we were married at this point, so he said very lovingly, so many people have covered this song and have way better voices than you. So why are you covering it? Um, and I said, honey, that's not what it's about. So yeah, the song Creep, I've always seen that song as someone that has this love or this person that they are putting on a pedestal that they say are perfect, angelic,
Yeah.
they're beautiful, they're all these things that they are not. I am
Yeah.
not those things. You are those things. I am not those things. Therefore, we can't be together,
Yeah.
or I'm a creep, right? You know, um, And I wanted to really draw out that like ominous, depressive state side of those lyrics,
Yeah.
because of where I wanted to situate it within the storyline, which is why the instrumentation is a little bit creepier, no pun
Mm.
intended, but creepier than, the rock song that people are used to or what
Yeah.
have you, the original. But it's, yeah, it's meant to capture that like, oh, I have this trauma and I have these experiences that push you away, this person that I'm madly in love with at any other time. And it makes me feel like I'm unfit for love. Like I'm just not good at this and I don't deserve it, right? Because
Yeah.
I'm not good at it. And so you go find love that you're deserving of because it's not with me. I can't give you
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, for sure. I think a lot of us can relate to that feeling at some point, where it feels like we're running out of steam within ourselves, with a relationship, and you just reach that point where you're like, look, I don't understand, why are you with me? Like, those sort of emotions,
Yeah,
like, I don't understand this. And it's a whole journey, to find that place within ourselves to where that sort of trauma and that feeling comes from. But it's
right.
definitely one that when we go through it for the first time, it's like that defense mechanism goes up and it's like, oh, almost like an easy out, not to have to deal with all the hard stuff. And,
Yeah.
it's always very confronting when it happens at first, but it's something we have to work through for not just for the relationship, but to find that space within ourselves. Otherwise, it's always going to, at some point in any happy relationship, in any relationship, reoccur again.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Um, yeah. I mean, part of another reason why I put that song on there and really tried to draw out that feeling is I want people to know that they are not alone in having those experiences.
Yeah,
They're not abnormal. They're actually quite normal.
yeah,
Um, and if you're a Brene Brown fan, she talks about how shame really comes out when you feel isolated in your experience, in your
yeah,
feeling. It's
yeah,
not about the feeling itself, it's about the fact that you feel like you're the only one that has it, right? And you
yeah,
can't go to talk to anyone else about it. And so I really wanted to sort of convey like, hey, other people have that experience, and so you can feel a little less alone, and maybe even talk about it with someone.
yeah, definitely. And as the album progresses, so we go on to the next track. So how did it come together? So you've got in terms of meant to be. So how was the process for that in terms of the lyrics and the evolution? So you go from Creep and now, you bring in the next track. So how was it as well? I'm curious, like how long was the process for writing the album itself?
Yeah. So for writing the album, it took 18 months, something
Oh,
like that.
nice. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, Mainly because there were certain parts of the album that just took a little bit longer.
Yeah.
That I wanted to make sure that they fit in with the story and it progressed how it was supposed to progress.
Yeah.
Meant to Be is the only song that the only true song that I'm not on.
Yeah.
Um, it's mainly just instrumental and then some other sample. Um, but it acts as this bridge in the same way
Yeah.
that Moments Reprise acted as a bridge between the luscious love chords and this harsh synth chords. Meant to Be acts as a bridge between this person is like super depressed and in a
Yeah.
very dark place to they're finding their way out of that dark place into somewhere where they can start to reflect and love themselves a little bit more.
Yeah.
So that was the main intention behind it, is to sonically cultivate that emotion.
Yeah, I feel like that makes like that perfect lead, into May I Love in the outro, because then you've got that sort of that introspective moment where you're like, well, I've had to face my demons and maybe my expectations of what love is, but kind of all these internal demons and battles that I've been through in the past, I've had to confront to, find places of improving my own self-worth and feelings of enoughness. So how was it sort of, as you bring the album to a close and finding, putting those tracks together and choosing the outro, and how did you feel when you were like, yeah, I've done this, like I'm ready to put this out into the world?
Yeah. May I Love is one of the other songs that I'm really proud of. Um, Partly because it extends on the art piece analogy, but now I'm talking about myself as like a
Yeah,
drawing, a painting
yeah,
that I had to study and work through blemishes and all that. But also going back to the fact that the relationship was the relationship was almost like this restorer. What's the actual word? Forget, but the restorer of an art piece, which is myself.
yeah,
In the final line of uh, portrait of Prince Henry deserves second chances. So I don't know how much art history you know, and I'm not an expert either, but there's a portrait of a someone that's Prince Henry,
mm,
that was restored, right?
yeah,
And brought back to its original state. And so it just kind of fit in because I was talking about myself as a portrait that my
yeah,
husband helped restore and bring back to a state of like beauty and what have you.
yeah,
So yeah, and then as once I was done, yeah, I don't know, my husband and I sat and listened to it. He cried, and
yeah,
then um, I set it to release, and it was like, cool, it's done.
yeah,
But then I was a little depressed. I'm like, well, now what? I
yeah,
put all that energy, and it's out in the world, and like it's no longer part of, not like it's no longer part of me, but a little bit like that.
yeah,
Once you put art into the world, it's no longer yours. It's the people
yeah,
listening
so
to it.
true. Yeah, because it's like, you go through creating this art with everything through your lens, and then suddenly you've got that confronting feeling of, you've got everyone else's interpretations of it. But
Yeah.
that's where a lot of the excitement comes to, it's like
Yeah.
you get to put it out there, and suddenly, it's for the world to listen to. So it's got to be very exciting at the same time.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I've loved conversations like this one where people actually have listened to the album and like, well, tell me about this part, or why did you choose to do sort of this sequencing? I love conversations like that. I'm a huge fan of behind the scenes and
Yeah.
dissecting albums and all that. So I love it when someone takes the time to dissect my album. It's a very high form of respect, which I appreciate.
And I think, it's such an exciting time now because I imagine as you go into the new year, you'll have, all these opportunities with gigs and getting to perform. And how is it sort of as you go into 2025 musically? Do you have any other releases planned, or are you just kind of having, a bit of chill time now and then you'll start something when it feels right?
Yeah, actually, I already know what my next album's going to be about,
Oh, nice.
but I'm thinking about some EPs and mixtapes that I find interesting that I can write in between. I
Yeah,
think there's a lot of value in just continuing to exercise and perfect your craft, or at least keep your pen sharp, as they say.
yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, there'll be some singles, some EPs, maybe some features. And then eventually in probably 12 months, 18 months, there will be a full-fledged album again.
Yeah, nice, exciting. And so, in terms of your socials, music, so where can people find you? So where should they look on Spotify? How can people, get in contact? What's the best way to find you for either your music and also socials as well?
Yeah, so the easiest way is probably just going to my website, the THEEJ Henry HENRY.com.
Yeah,
And that has all the socials and what have you there, links to Spotify, Apple Music, all of that. Yeah, probably just go there. That's probably easiest. That's the hub. That'll take you
yeah.
anywhere you want to go.
Yeah, perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining me today on the Queerness Diaries. It's been fantastic not only to delve into your diary, and it's also been great to hear, your creative process, how you brought the album to life. I always think it's fantastic to hear from the queer artists out there that are, putting their art out there for the world to listen to and see. So thank you so much for joining me today on the podcast. And I'm super excited to see the new music and what's coming next.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me and for the great questions.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. And so to all the guests, thank you for tuning in to the Queerness Diaries, and we'll be back next Friday.